Hi, I'm Somri Dijk. I'm a medical psychologist, a teacher, and a researcher.
Hi, my name is Boy Velbrief. I'm a medical ethicist, teacher, and researcher.
And in this video, we'll be presenting a roadmap to creating a research master program, which is exactly what we did during the past years. And actually, we were really not the right people to do so, but we became it along the way. And we've gained so many insights and so many lessons learned, and this video intends to share those.
So what we wanted to do is, in our field, which is genomics, create a master's that is all about impact education. Impact education means that you teach and empower your students to make an impact in society. So broadly speaking, with the science that our students do, are they making people's lives better? And this is the central idea that we took and we're very passionate about when we designed this master's.
Exactly, because we noticed that there was a really big gap. Working in the field of genomics, people are heavily impacted by new technologies, decisions that they have to make, disruptive technologies that have the potential to change human nature. And we didn't see that people were being trained to address those issues. And while nobody was being trained for it, there were no right people to set it up. So that made us think we should do it.
So in this video, we will guide you through this roadmap that we've designed for setting up a new master's program. And in the first step, we'll start with talking about the inception of an idea. How do you come up with an idea for a research master's? But more importantly, how do you find the right motivated people to help you along the way and solidify that idea?
Yes, and once you have that good idea and it's solidified, how do you pitch that to your board? Is it just a shout out, or are there any strategic ways to make sure that it aligns with the mission and strategy of your institute?
And also, how do you attract funding for a research master's? And what are the criteria of the funding bodies that they use to actually gauge whether or not your master's is good enough for funding?
Yes, and not simultaneously, or maybe before or after, in parallel, you will also have to design your program. And that takes a village of people and different kinds of expertise.
And once you've designed your program, you actually need accreditation to ascertain the quality of your program. There's also steps you'll need to take there and apply to certain institutional bodies in order to make sure that your master's is of a high enough quality.
And while you've been working intensely with so many people, you will probably have set up an organization within your institute. And it's good to put a name on it. So we'll be addressing that in the small school conversation.
All of this sounds like a lot of work, and it is a lot of work.
It's overwhelming.
But it's also a lot of fun, and it's also very motivating and energizing.
Yes, and probably within your own context, while watching this video, you're already quite motivated to get started with your program. And, you know, we brought to the table what we have as an inspiration. You'll probably have your own. So by no means this video is prescriptive, but we do feel there's important lessons in every step of the way that might be applicable to your situation. So take notes, write down your questions, and also in the end, if you would like to have contact with us, we're very willing to do it. So to get started, Boy will give an overview of the steps that we took in setting up a research master program.
So first, we'll be having a look at the formation of the idea. So how do you actually come up with an idea for a research master's? And more importantly, how do you transport that idea to something more tangible, to something that you can present to a university board, for example? We're going to talk about the details of that process. How do you do that? How do you get there? And how do you actually let people tag along? How do you make people enthusiastic for an idea like that and for them to contribute? So here we talk with Diewertje Houtman, who is a teacher and researcher. We talk to Fred Petri, who is a teacher and the head of the examination board. And we talk to Manfred Kaiser, who is the head of the Department of Genetic Identification. We're going to talk a little bit about the formation of an idea for a new research master's. So let's trace it all the way back to the beginning. Where did we actually get the idea for starting a new master?
Well, I didn't really have the idea, but I really had the need for this new master's. So I did some previous education here at Erasmus Medical Center, the minor genetics in society that we already have for 10 years. And I really liked it. So I wanted to continue doing something in genetics, but I had a bachelor in psychology. So there wasn't really a master's program that would admit me with this background. So it didn't exist, and I went to Sam explaining this. So I'm looking for this master, but it's not here. So I think that was where the seed was planted a little bit, and that was one of the things that sparked the idea.
And what specifically were you missing then? What were you looking for?
I think the masters that were existing, they were only admitting students with a background in medicine or biomedical sciences. So they were also very much focused on that aspect of genetics. And I was really looking for the interdisciplinarity and also the social, the ethical, the legal aspects of genetics. And I couldn't find that anywhere. And I also think it was really missing because I did a minor and I saw that it's so important to also have these different perspectives on genetics and that we also need to collaborate between these different disciplines in order for us to have positive impact with genetics and developments in the field of genetics.
So, Sam, what were you thinking when Diewertje came up to you and she asked that?
I thought, I thought she was right. I thought that was a really good idea. It's also quite nice when an idea doesn't start from the developer's side, but it starts from the persons that are looking for an educational program. So that actually indicated that there might really be a need for that instead of my bias, that of course I would want a research master in that area because it has my interest, it has my excitement. And at the same time, I was part of the scientific program committee of the European Society of Human Genetics. And there was this new thing that we could edit the genome of human beings, the germline actually. And that, that could actually alter human nature. And that was such a disruptive technology that was being presented. And all of the ethicists, they were like, yes, we should think about this. We should engage the public on this because this regards everyone. And I totally agreed. But from the perspective of the scientific program committee, I was reviewing abstracts every year. And I didn't see those abstracts come in where the public was actually being engaged. And it made me think, like, why is everyone agreeing that this should be done? And why is nobody doing it? And that sort of coincided with Diewertje's request. Because I thought nobody's actually training professionals to move out of the walls of our scientific domain and go into society and engage with society. So people should be taught. But it's new and nobody knows how to do it. So if nobody knows how to do it, let's just get started then, So
it was really basically a beautiful meeting between sort of from the bottom up students really wanting and needing these kinds of research masters, but also a little bit top down from the discipline itself, a need for these kinds of educated students.
Yeah, and then of course you can think, but maybe we're just crazy, So you have to check whether other people also see the need for something like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we asked Fred and Manfred to be here.
We did think you were crazy in the beginning. So that's right.
Speak for yourself. What did you think?
Well, for me the seed lies of course in the minor, because we started actually 12 years ago talking about seed. There is the seed, because 12 years ago we had to go into the bachelor-master structure for medicine, and we had to develop a minor in that sense. And then we developed actually the genetics in society thing for medicine students, and we didn't get the students. And then some got a terrific idea to, instead of making a deepening minor, a broadening minor. And what does this broadening minor mean? That it's not only for medicine students but for many other students. And then we got psychology students. Actually the first year we did it, we had no medicine students, and the most bright student there was a law student. It was really amazing. And I actually thought at that time, when Sam was talking about couldn't we make a master out of that, that she was a bit megalomaniac, thinking of, okay, we're going to make a master, and that's not nothing, because if you're going for a master, at the end the government pays for it, so it's a paid for new master, and you have to go through a whole lot of hoops, which we can talk about later perhaps. So that's a big, big task, and actually we didn't know how big that task was.
Yeah, indeed. So that already sort of a proof of concept almost.
But then you have to prove, of course, when you make a master like this, and that is one of the hoops you have to go through, is that if you make these or you have students that finish this master, that you really have a work field for them. You have to prove that before the government says, okay, we are going to pay for it. So that's a difficult one.
But there we had a lot of help from you.
No, yeah, I don't think that's a difficult one, because I mean, obviously we are living in a world of more and more specialization, which is needed because the expert fields become more and more specialized, right? So on one hand you need these specialists, and in genomics you need these specialists, and to make genomic innovations you need these specialists, right? But then at some time, at least if your genomics works out, it ends up in society in many aspects, in medicine, in forensics where I work, right? But then you don't want these specialists anymore, huh? Because you deal with people that should bring it in society on all types of levels, government, ministries, public institutions. And that's where then the problem starts, right? Because you have people that are trained on their own specialized fields, in genomics, maybe in ethics, maybe in social science, huh? But they should work on the interface, and they are not trained in working on the interface. So in that respect, it's not only simply starting with a new master, which indeed I agree. Here in our situation, it was perfect that we had the minor before, right? But it's really creating something that doesn't exist, not as a new specialized field, but really as something that goes across the fields. Yeah? And that on one hand, I think is a perfect justification why we need this, because there's a societal need for this. On the other hand, it makes it very difficult to do this, right? Because obviously, and especially in the master, and not so much in the minor. So the minor, at least what we did was more orientation, so giving the people an overview, and that's perfectly fine for a minor, right? But of course, in a master, you have to go beyond, right? And then you have to create specialized knowledge, basically on these very different fields, that typically don't talk to each other, and you're confronted with the situation that you have students that come from these very different fields who normally don't talk to each other, and then now they're in the same room, right? And the one group that doesn't have genomic background has to gain the genomics, which I think still is the bigger challenge than for the other group that has this that has the genomics background, has to gain the societal, but that's probably my naiveness of coming from the genomics, right? Whereas the societal scientists would say, there's lots of things these purebred geneticists have to get from us, right? And of course, it both is true, right? So I think that interface, to get it to work and to actually train those type of specialized people that are specialized on both fields, which I think the society needs, that's a challenge of the master, but I mean, that's actually what we did in this program. Right?
Yeah, so that's an insight that I think surfaced quite early, but it was very much still an idea, a concept. So what are then the first steps you take to actually turn that idea or concept into a reality?
Talking to your boss. So that was one of the first steps we did, actually, talking to our head of department and saying, okay, this is an idea. And well, in the beginning that was of course very difficult, but fortunately in the Department of Clinical Genetics we had a head of department that was really going along with this and trying to think and really help to get it started. Because yeah, from a Department of Clinical Genetics, that's just one of those directions. We are not a department of psychology, we are not a department of law, we are not a department of etc. So you have to have a seat somewhere, and having somebody at a higher level that supports this. So that is actually many other steps came after that, but that's the real thing. You have to have an idea, you have to have somebody that is a bit crazy that says we go for this because it's a difficult task, and you have to have somebody higher up that's also a little bit on the money that sees the idea as a good idea.
But then practically speaking, I think the question is, if there is such a need to get people together, how are you going to get all these very busy people who are liable to disagree with each other, even based on their disciplines? How do you get them around the table? How do you get them to sacrifice their time, persuade them to contribute?
You know, when you think you find the evidence that this is an important gap to fill, and you start talking to people, they're going to respond, right? So for me, it's always been very important to see the responses of people. Like, are they enthused? Are they saying, yes, this is a good idea, this is important, and are they then willing to bring energy to that idea as well? Because I think that if you're not sitting on a good idea, that's not going to happen. Like, if you need to persuade people, then maybe it's not a good idea, right? So I was just wondering.
Or the wrong people then.
Or the wrong people. I was wondering, like, when you were, all of you, when you were involved early onwards, like, what were the responses that you were getting from people when you were talking about, oh, I'm going to be involved in this new idea, or, you know, what were the responses when you were talking? To who did you talk about?
Well, to my people, of course, which help in the program, and there was no hesitations, because we operate in this specific area where these people partly are needed but don't exist. So that was a no-brainer for them. But of course, there was a special background, right? But obviously, for those that, for instance, then come from social sciences and are supposed to teach here, right? I mean, yeah, again, you need the people that think outside of the box, right? So you need these open-minded people. You may also need those that actually have experienced or know the need, right? And basically suffer from the need and they don't have a personal interest to solve this, which of course typically takes years and years because you have to educate and then they go to the market, right? So it's a combination of both perhaps, but yeah, I mean, you have to find the right people, as always.
Yeah, I thought it was crazy, so I talked to nobody about it.
Only the crazy people.
Well, actually, in the beginning, that's the truth. I thought, okay, you have this crazy idea, mainly you. Like, okay, let's see how this goes. I was not opposed to it. I said, okay, look how this goes. And then when, for instance, the department head was going along, and then I said, okay. And then I talked, of course, at a certain point also to medical students, but then we were much further, like, this is what we are doing, and this could be interesting, and some were then enthusiastic about it. It's a master, it's education, so you have to talk to educational partners also. And so we are talking about different scientific groups or society, etc., but you also have to have educational concepts. So then talking to people who are more into education and organizing education, yeah, okay, they were more interested and also actually looking from the sideline, oh, I'm going to look how this will go, if they will succeed. That's a big task.
And I would say in this Genomics Society Master, the way we educate is very different, I would even say, that the way people educate in the other master programs. And one of the reasons is that this is a recent one that was set up now in a different time with new demands from the students, but also from the accreditation bodies, right?
But it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, like I said, it's an exploration for yourself as well, that you're in new territories where you have to make these connections with other disciplines. But on the other hand, you're also talking about how you're going to teach that to students. So you're going to have to do that while not even knowing yourself exactly how to do that. So per definition, it's a huge experiment, which is also really exciting, because that's then also an indication of how you're going to set up your education. I think traditionally we're used to people who are experts, who have lots of knowledge, who already know how to do everything. These are the people who teach students and they pass on their knowledge. But I think, for me at least, I soon realized that's not really the way we can do things, we can afford to do things, because it's knowledge we don't necessarily have, but we're going to co-create it with our students. And that I thought was really exciting, that, you know, I can be in the classroom, I don't necessarily have to tell students how to do things, but I can ask them questions or present them with dilemmas from the field, and then we can work something out together. For me, that was, I think, the most exciting.
I think this touches on a very important point. I remember in the accreditation, we were kind of criticized by the board to have too many junior people involved and not enough senior people, right? And my immediate response was, but you can't change the world with the old farts, right? Because they made the world upside down and they will not change that, right? So you need these young people, right? And yes, they don't come with the experience, but that's exactly what you want, right? Because this type of education you don't get from those that have done not this, but other things for the last 20 years, right? And you don't get this by the people that well, you need these young people, right? I mean, not only that they are young physically, but also that they're young and open-minded, and typically this goes together, right?
Yeah, but that's really an old concept. We got also from the examination board side, very annoyed by this. Because we talked to the accreditation board about these young people, and we saw that coming, that they would urge that everybody who is a course coordinator within our program has a PhD. Whereas some of the members of the board were very enthusiastic about what you showed and what you already did. So they were amazed about your competences already, although you didn't have your PhD. Because now I am one of the old farts that has to be there as somebody with a PhD that has to be on the paper.
Yeah, and Fred, let's face it, I mean, we would never have been able to do this. Right? So it needs you guys, right? And the best, it needs all of us together, right? So I mean, this is actually also a take home that you run against walls on different levels if you really want to do something substantially new, right? Even at the final accreditation level, I always thought, oh, what's that now? Will it go wrong now at the last minute? Because we don't have the right people on the right places, whereas we thought, well, we have exactly the right people at the right places.
Yeah, and I mean, in the end, maybe this is also about diversity, which is a bit of a buzzword, of course, but diversity doesn't only mean diversity of disciplines. It also means another type of diversity, in this case, seniority. So it's important because then diversity is not something, you know, just as window dressing, but really something that is functional, that is integral to the success of your program, actually. So now we've discussed quite a few conditions basically under which a program like this can grow. Are there perhaps any conditions, beneficial conditions for a master's program to sprout that we haven't discussed yet?
Yeah, so I think for the teachers, we were also going to work together in this master, and we also had these different disciplines, different backgrounds. So we also needed to develop this common language and to be able to communicate with each other, to have the same goals in our education. And I think what really helped was that we did the same educational courses together. So the university teaching qualification, we did those together. And there we also started developing our courses with each other, and we also saw that growing and development with each other. And I think that really helped in creating this common language and common goals.
Yeah, and I think the way that, you know, the reason why we kept on pushing it is because every time that we took the next step, there was new excitement and energy, and we were proud, and we were just, every time was just reinforcing, keep going.
I also kind of feel like we never really waited to get the green light. We were just doing this, like.
Yeah, but also doing it as if we had already gotten approval.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it needs a certain level of ignorance to change something.
Belief. We call that belief. But actually, we call it manipulating the universe. What? That's what we call it.
Which requires that you know the game, right? And apparently
then we are coming back to megalomaniac.
Well, which is apparently a very important ingredient for setting up a master's program.
You have to be a bit, because it's a big task ahead.
Well, there comes the ignorance.
You really have to think, we can do this. Yeah. We can do it.
I think we covered everything that we should cover in this conversation.
I think so too, yeah. So based on everything we've discussed thus far, if there was one thing that you could pass on to someone developing a master's program right now, one pearl or valuable insight, what would it be?
Find the right people. As difficult as it is and simple as it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking out of the box and believe in it.
Yes, true. Yeah.
Act as if it's already happened, as if it's already there.
That's a good one.
Oh, that's a good one.
You named it, but up until now, I don't think I really realized how valuable that was, that we all sort of had this common understanding of, but of course this is going to happen. And like you said, Fred, the persistence, it's about persistence, yeah. And persistence is very difficult if you have lots of other options that you think you can take rather than, you know, developing and delivering the program. But that was never really an option, which was, I think, a key to the success.
I think, well, given my background, develop the master's program that you would have wanted to follow yourself. I think it's very true for me, but I think also for the other teachers in our master's program. So,
yeah, and how many times haven't we heard people say that, oh, I would have wanted to do this. Yeah, no, it's true, yeah. And for me, I think it's creating the space for everyone to contribute from their heart and soul. If you want to join us, join us. If you think you can contribute, do it. And don't prescribe anything.
Oh, and if you have faith, then persistence is not that difficult.
True, yeah.
Thank you all very much for your contributions.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you.
thank you.
Wow, that was so enjoyable to watch, to see how far we've come, like talking about the inception of the idea. How did it make you feel?
Well, it really takes me back, you know, having done all of that, having gone through all of that, and then sort of almost dredging everything up again, it makes you feel, wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It was also a little bit confronting to be called a megalomaniac.
I can imagine. But yeah, for me, what really struck me is that mindset, you kind of need that in a way. You don't want to be a megalomaniac all of the time, but sometimes you need to slam your fist on the table and say, we're going to do this, no matter what.
Yes, I remember the very first meeting that we had about starting this research master program. Somebody said, do you actually have the time for this in your job description? And I had to be honest and say, no, it's going to be outside of my job description. But then basically for everybody involved, it was going to be outside of their job descriptions.
Yeah. Another factor that's really important there and that really carried us through the whole process was acting as if it had already happened, as if we were already going to do this no matter what. It wasn't a question of if we were going to do this, it was a matter of when are we going to do this.
And how.
And how, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and during that phase, so it's really important, also it's highlighted during our conversation that we just saw, that you have to check for the viability of your idea by talking to a lot of people. It's actually quite an entrepreneurial attitude, right? To go like, let's see if it's viable, let's see how people respond to this.
It is. In a sense, you're trying to sell your idea to people. And I think that's the way to go about it, to really, not really persuade them to come buy whatever it is that you're selling, but they have to say, wow, this is so great, we want to tag along.
So we didn't convince and we didn't persuade. Actually, we just checked whether people shared the motivation to get this going. And then by checking this idea with a lot of people, we also made sure that the right people came on board. And having the right team to present the idea is a very strong point, because that actually gives those who decide about whether or not to proceed with this the confidence that it might be a feasible idea. So this entrepreneurial way of going about, so checking with people, also prepares you really well for the next step, which is pitching to the board. So in the next conversation, we'll be listening to Hans van Leeuwen, who was the dean back in the days, and also to Maart Frens, who was the dean of education back in the days. And their dynamics are a little bit different because both of them had different roles to play, but we'll be looking into that. So guys, it's really nice to have you here in this video on how to make an educational program. You played important parts in the very beginning of the Research Master. Hans, maybe you first. When did you first became aware of a new Research Master program plan, and what was your initial idea about that and your response?
The first time I heard about it, I think it was in spring 2019, when I, in my function as a dean, had regular meetings with department heads. There was one agenda item, GIS.
What was your initial response to that idea?
I think it's great that you see that people in your organization are stepping forward with ideas, with plans to innovate, to bring new things alive. And so that was my first response. Great that people are doing that. Second to that, it's also fitted in the idea that we carefully had to think about our educational portfolio, and maybe not really visible for you And for Robert at that moment was the development behind the scenes about thinking about convergence.
Yeah, there was a momentum for it.
Yeah, also for the development where Erasmus Medical Center, the stage where Erasmus Medical Center was in what kind of direction shall we move? Now, that was the convergence direction, which is now much more prominent and is further developed, but so it fitted in there because I think what I understood at that moment from this educational plan was really a convergence of expertise bringing together and to educate, to generate a new type of workforce, if you may call it like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Taken from what you were saying right now, if anyone wants to start a new educational program, it would be good for them to explore the landscape of what the developments in which direction they're heading and where it's necessary to really create new knowledge then.
Yeah, for sure, because it should fill a gap or it should maybe add something new to an existing program, for example. This is a good program, but if we look to this program in this day and age, it's maybe missing something extra, or we could improve it or extend the attractive, how attractive it is or what it can bring to society if we combine it with other programs. So I think that's very important. There should be a clear scan of the educational landscape, plus what's needed in society, so to create societal challenges. And are our educational programs at the moment such that they can address these societal challenges? So that's really important, and yeah, then come up with a good plan. Yeah. And that's the first step, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like there's also a really nice story to be heard from you. When you first entered our organization as the Dean of Education, well, we didn't immediately meet up, but we were already developing. So when did you first hear about genomics in society, and what was your initial response?
It must have been in the first few weeks that I started as a vice dean. When Hans appointed me, I got the general role as a vice dean, but two specific tasks. One of them being start a graduate school. We've already tried this 3 times, so this time it better work.
No pressure.
And so there was a list of existing graduate schools, and I met with all the people over there. And then also on the list was an initiative to start a new research master. And for that reason, I remember meeting you and Robert at his office.
Yeah. Yeah, that was our first meeting, yeah.
What I remember from that meeting is that the amount of enthusiasm, that I thought that the whole program should be completely different from what you guys had in mind.
In what way?
Well, I thought genomics in society would maybe be not enough. I got like the whole convergence thing and everything, but that the base would not be broad enough. I remember in the first meeting suggesting, hey, let's do a master life sciences and society.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And I remember that you guys were completely disconnected from everything else in educational Erasmus MC. And you started your own thing with external people, and so that somehow my role would be to channel all this enthusiasm and connect it to an organization which in itself wasn't so well organized because the whole graduate school still had to start. So that was the role and the challenge I saw for myself walking out of there.
So looking back on your role in the very beginning, what did you do to facilitate the development, and maybe also in hindsight, what would you have done differently, or what would you recommend someone else in that position?
What I did at that time was embrace the idea and show that it fitted in what we are working on as Erasmus Medical Center, and that it was a great idea to take it a step further from an idea and a plan that was shared by a couple of people to a more formal structure that it would be ready to go the whole procedure, which you had to go through the Erasmus University, etc. It's not a done deal because there are so many facets that needs to be addressed, and one of the things is the financial paragraph. And that's what I knew from other programs we developed, nanobiology and clinical technology, that the financial paragraph was not really very solid. That made us a bit reluctant. The idea can be good and go ahead, but at some point, yeah, you should look at the financial paragraph. So that was some of also my role to take care of that. What would I have done differently? If we look at the research masters, it was a beautiful bouquet of flowers, but there was not something that held them together. And that was missing at that time. And I think there, with the development of the graduate school, and at some point the appointment of Maarten as Vice Dean of Education, I think we made a real great step to take care of these developments in a much more structural manner.
A quick recap, what I get from you is take care of an educational infrastructure so that the new program can really get some roots, and is rooted somewhere, and it can grow from there.
That's really important, and that's what I think we have now much better than in those days.
And then, because the graduate school was still in development and there was a disconnect, so what were then the things in your role that you managed to do for the program? And in hindsight, like, what are there things that you would have done differently, or that you would recommend somebody else in that capacity to be mindful of?
If I would now start a new program, which I'm actually doing, or at least thinking about, I would definitely make sure that in the whole planning phase, you really involve lots of stakeholders. Make a map of people who have high stakes in this, but also people who are maybe have a low stake, but who will be influential, or maybe even annoyed if they don't know about this, if they hear about it too late. And sort of start spreading the word.
Yeah, that's true, but I think most important, and that's also for research, it starts with the idea, with the motivation, the enthusiasm about the idea, that you want to create something, you want to investigate something, you want to develop something. So it starts with the idea and the challenge, and then working your way, you can take care of it. But if you start with obstacles, you never get off the ground. Yeah, so that's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you start a new educational program, and being a professional involved in education, you get a lot of support and a lot of access to courses that teach you to have an educational vision, to develop courses, curricula. So there's a lot of focus on the content of education, but there's hardly any focus on the infrastructure surrounding education. So what I really was unprepared for was this, like, how's the educational infrastructure, how's the support within the organization, how does an organization create financial means for a new program? So how do you think that you would describe that? Like, how does an organization attribute or allocate resources to a new educational program, and how can you influence that?
Well, I think all the initiatives and all the enthusiasm should come from content, because that's what we're all about, right? Both in our education, in our research, it's about what we want to do. And the organization needs to decide what its strategic goals are. And you can see that at Erasmus MC now, like, we are defining a strategic research agenda. We're part of the convergence, where we want to introduce more technology and more society into our whole curriculum. And I think, given the portfolio that you have and your strategic goals that you have, or maybe the vision, you should think about, like, what do we miss in our portfolio that we should create in order to educate, because education is always about the future, of course, right? To educate those people that we actually want to run the whole place in, say, 10, 15 years from now.
So when you're saying that, I'm thinking, okay, so I was employed as a medical psychologist, and I was the coordinator of a minor genetics in society. But when I hear a plan like this, I'm thinking, what kind of staff do you need to move through this plan? So in hindsight, like, that may not have been my role. Like, who would you appoint?
No, I don't think that's your role. And again, at the time, we didn't have a graduate school or a graduate school office. But I do think now we have the expertise over there, and then the graduate school, of course, is connected very well to the rest of the organization. We have the expertise there with people who know how to do these things. And it's not like we set up a program every day or every year, so it's not, we have not specifically hired people to make new master programs, because that would be a disaster if we would do that. But we do have the expertise, they sort of know what it takes, they know who to talk to and where to. So every time again, a strategic need arises in Erasmus MC, and this can be bottom up or top down, I think it's very important to team up an academic who knows about the content and who sort of has an idea what they want to teach, with someone who really has an expertise in educational processes and infrastructure. And it should always be a team like that who are doing things together.
I think what also helped us was that we didn't only look in our organization for help, but we also looked at the Center for Learning and Innovation from the UR, where they had funding which you could apply for creating content of education, but also the teacher professionalization programs. So we had all of our core teachers enrolled at the same time to create blueprints for their courses. So there was a lot of expertise and know-how that was not necessarily in our organization, but was also in the Erasmus University. And we were very keen on discovering what was out there and making use of that. And I think that also created strong relationships. Like we had a good relationship with the graduate school, but we could also create relationships with other educational parties from our institute.
Yeah, and I think it's good to get input from outside, otherwise but you also need that contact point and the embedding in the standing organization. And I think that catalyzed the whole process, maybe the GIS catalyzed GS maybe a little bit. I think it fits in the tradition of Erasmus Medical Center. The strength of Erasmus Medical Center is the, let's say, scientific, educational entrepreneurship of people working in Erasmus MC. A lot of departments are, for the content, rather independent. They want to develop. And you see that all kinds of places in Erasmus Medical Center. That's the strength, that individual responsibility to move things forward. So let's say decentral entrepreneurship. And that's always the struggle, because as soon as you say to somebody with a great idea, yeah, but we need to organize it also in a better way that it fits the whole organization, that we're not going to develop there the same thing, but then for a different department. That's really the challenge. And I think that's a matter of culture. People realize now that if you organize things like in the graduate school, but also if you think of the IT, the research IT, centrally in a very great and good way, that it doesn't take away your autonomy as scientist, your autonomy as an educator, but that you're supported better. And that's really...
You're unburdened.
So, so I think Genomics in Society fits in a tradition of Erasmus Medical Center, but what I try to initiate around this with the graduate school and research, that we have some kind of organization form, that you don't have to think about all these things that are important to develop a program, or all the things that are important to store data or to compute. That's there. You're also not thinking about the water that's coming from the tap. That's also organized. Or the electricity. So that's the challenge. But so in that way, part of a great tradition of, I think, Erasmus Medical Center.
No, that sounds a lot more connected.
Yeah. I think it, and that should stay. That should stay, because that's a strength.
It's the energy that you want to keep in your organization.
Yeah. I think it starts, well, as I said before, with the idea, with the creativity, with the ambition to create something new that fills a gap, or that brings something new of expertise that is needed for the future to address societal issue or to make connections in society. There it starts. So I think that should be central. And then in the situation as Erasmus Medical Center right now, as a faculty of a university, if we would say, now talk with the Dean of Education, not halfway or 25% along the route, but earlier. But it starts with the idea and the ambition, but then bring it forward. Yeah, and I think now we have an organization that could better help it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say indeed it starts with an ID, and IDs are energizing, but it's a lot of hard work to make a good educational program. And it involves lots of people, it involves lots of perspectives. Everyone will be miserable somewhere during the process, and that's part of it. But it's also worth it, right? I mean, there's very few things that are more gratifying than educating young people and making great new professionals and helping them in their development, both as a person and as a professional. But it's not just having good ideas. There's just so much gaps and details and important decisions to make all the time, all along the path. But it's fun, as long as you keep the dot on the horizon in mind in a good way.
Thank you. Thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Wow, that was a really interesting conversation. And also for me, I wasn't very much involved in that side of the, higher up conversation. So it's for me also really enlightening to see how that happened. And what also struck me was that there was an interesting dynamic going on between you guys. So Hans was really enthusiastic about, the entrepreneurial attitude that we took while, pitching this to the board. But Martin seemed a little more critical. Why is that?
So the way it happened was that our department head, Robert, was very excited about the idea of the research master, and he sort of put me forth to talk with Hans. So I had a one-on-one with Hans van Leeuwen, and he was also very excited. And after this conversation, he just signed on behalf of the board that this was a really good idea. But what happened because of that was that we as a group of developers were completely unplugged. We were just working in our bubble. We were not plugged into the organization, into the right departments, and we didn't have the right experts on board. And whenever we would talk to those people, they would say, we don't have the resources to support you in this project. And when Marta came into play, he actually had to fix that. So he had to make sure that everybody came on board. So what the lesson learned there is that in our enthusiasm, we ran way ahead of everyone, and we sort of forgot to tag those people along that were in the organization and that would also be, required to make it happen.
And I think that's so insightful, because you have the person who's like highest up in the organization at that moment who says, wow, this is a great idea, let's do this. But if you don't mobilize all of these departments that you need for a research master's, and you need a lot of departments for a research master's, then you're in trouble. You don't have the support that you need, and it's just not going to happen, because it's also about resources, but also about relationship management with these departments, right? So how did we eventually end up fixing that?
Yeah, so also what Martin is mentioning is that at that time, the Institute was lacking the infrastructure to create new educational programs. And that our Genomics in Society Research Master Program in its development sort of catalyzed that infrastructure needed to be built. And he gratefully used Genomics in Society as a research master program to say, look, this is coming, they need support, we have to have our graduate school in order. And the strategic thing that we then did with that was, knowing this, to whenever we got the opportunity to endorse the graduate school and to contribute to the creation of the graduate school, so that there was a really nice iteration in energy between Genomics in Society and the graduate school.
Yeah, and it's important to mention also to really be aware of what is the vision of the Institute that we operate in, and how does that align with the way we want to do things, because there can be a lot of overlap between that. But another important point is to realize, are we using the same words to talk about this? So find the connection between these visions, because it's very likely there, but you have to name it, you have to identify it, and you have to make sure that you can communicate clearly about that.
Yeah, and it's not just a trick. So indeed, we sought out all these documents with stating the ambition, the vision, the strategy, and we took out the buzzwords from it, not only as a trick to say, look, we're doing the same thing, but really also as a check for ourselves. Like, are we going to contribute to the purpose of this institute? And if we are, then we should use the same language to make it visible. So one of the people who has given us really good advice during several points in our developmental process was Bineke Verheijken, and she's working at the Academic Affairs department of the Erasmus University. So she's very knowledgeable of all the governance structures and the timelines that you need to keep in mind when developing your portfolio. What I was not aware of is how many bodies in the organization need to actually give a green light to this idea and to the file that you're going to submit to the accreditation body. So I'm really happy that she's featuring here to give you already a heads up of the things that you should be mindful of. Can you tell us a little bit more about that internal process where, like, the journey of a file of a new educational program, where it needs to go through in the institute, and why?
Once you want to have a file with the executive board, I always start at the end, right? And then we're going to reason back. Executive board, once you want to have a file there, it needs to go to a meeting before that. That takes 2 weeks. Then it goes, before that it goes to the rector. That's another 2 weeks. So that's a 4-week period only to get a file from the rector magnificus to the executive board. Now, before you get an advice to the executive board, there is the Quality Assurance Department of Academic Affairs. Now imagine you've been working at your file of 200 or so pages with a lot of appendices, but other people need to read and understand these. So imagine how much time does reading a page take, and give these people the time to do that, because they do the final check whether these worries that we talked about before, whether they're addressed properly so that you stand a chance. So say you would give them 3 weeks. What do you think is reasonable? 4 weeks? There are weekends in these weeks, so count the working days.
Yeah.
So before that, oftentimes you need to go to your own dean. So we were at the 8 weeks, right? So 8 weeks on the central part of university. Before that, you need to go to your own dean. You need to go to your own bodies of participation, because that's the way the law is written, right? You can design, but your bodies of participation need to understand and agree. So they understand what is this program about and why is it necessary. So how much time would that take for the medical center, the trajectory of having that design ready and then going to the bodies of participation and the dean and giving them time to give feedback? How much does that normally take in your organization?
Yeah, I guess it would be around, I don't know, 6 weeks or so. It's a two-step approach, yeah.
And that is when the sun shines and there's no rain and there's no feedback, right? Mm-hmm. Because once people have opinions, you need to be able to redesign some. Mm-hmm. So if that would take 8 weeks, the sun shining,
yeah,
and your own trajectory would take 8 weeks, the sun shining, then you can imagine that the full process would take 16, 20 weeks. Mm-hmm. How many working weeks do you have in a year? Yeah. Out of, so most often people work between 40 and 45 weeks, right? So that's half of your year that you were working at this, only to get it through all the feedback stages.
Yeah, and then you didn't even keep in mind that there's just, fixed dates that these bodies meet, and that's with large intervals. So it may very well be that the next meeting is in 3 months.
What you could do is that you design almost important parts, and when all the files are being transported, you can work at other things, because a program design is one thing, but resourcing is the other thing. So of course, when you start designing a process, you have a check on the resources and the viability of things, but the detailing of what you need to do to make it happen, I would always work in two. Like first you have the design and you check the viability, you have the business cases, and you get all the documentation in process, and once that is being followed up, you start working with your teacher teams, you start building the resources, you start checking what you could do to get everything in place. Because oftentimes people do it sometimes they forget it, well, that's another story, but if you start designing it all at one point in time, then that final hurdle takes so long So it's also a matter of having a smart design that could help you there.
I wish I'd spoken with Bineke before to know about things like a faculty council and the timelines that are involved in getting your project going. What's also really important to get your educational program to life is having funding. Without funding in the Netherlands, you will have to pay as a student about 20,000 euros to get into the program, whereas with the governmental funding, this will only be 2,500 euros per year. So it's a huge difference. And for an institute, that actually means the difference between being able to offer the program or not being able to offer it at all. And in the Netherlands, this body is called the CDHO. So be aware of how the funding is arranged in the country that you are in and whether there are similar bodies or there's different kinds of setting up your finances, because that's actually the foundation of your educational program. So in this conversation, we will see Desiree Meijer, who is a specialist at preparing the file for getting the funding for new educational programs. And also we'll be listening to Esther Rip, who as a program coordinator did all the research that was necessary to showcase that there was no such program yet. Another person who can see some really interesting things is Frauke. So we're here to look back on our CDHO process, which actually was a process to get our educational program funded by the government in the first place. So in the Netherlands, you have to pass sort of a test. You have to demonstrate that there is a societal, an educational, and a scientific need for the research master in this case. And Desiree, I'm really happy that you're here because you were the experts that we could rely on to guide us through this process. Is there anything that you can tell about just this part of creating an educational program?
It's worthwhile both for the government and also for the university itself to know a little bit whether the program will be a success, for instance, in terms of students that will come. But from the government side, the most important thing, in fact, there are two criteria. The first one is the labor market need, and the second criterion is that other programs don't already fulfill the labor market need. So when there would have been other programs in Genomics in Society in Holland, well, that would have been a problem to start another program.
You have to demonstrate that you are aware of the developments in the field, that there actually is a need for this program, but one way of demonstrating that is actually talking to professionals in the field, talking about like their needs for graduates, what this program would do for them, how this actually can provide the professionals in the field with new staff with a particular skill set or knowledge, competences that they can't get in current programs.
Yeah, so we had to discover whether there was, in the first place, a comparable program. And Esther, that's where you came in.
Well, it was quite a task. In the Netherlands, I just went through every university and every program to see if there was something comparable, regarding our program.
So did you look at like end terms? Did you look at courses? Did you look at?
We decided that we were also designing the end terms for our master, and we had decided that there would be a research part, a societal part, and the last one was genomics part. And those three parts I included as criteria into my Excel sheet. And there were some other two other factors. I'm not sure which they were exactly, which were included. And I just went through every program to see how they scored on all those parts. And by scoring those parts, we were able to see if they were a bit similar or really similar or not similar at all.
Yeah, and so there was one program that was similar in the genomics aspect, but that was evidently lacking the societal aspects that we were introducing.
Yeah.
And there we needed to do something with that. Do you remember what we did then?
Didn't you contact the VU program?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's always wise, and it's more or less compulsory, because the deans of the Dutch universities, they have made an agreement that they will inform each other about new programs they are going to develop. And when two programs are quite similar and are a little bit in the same domain, then it's always wise to contact the other university. Then you can discuss if there are any problems from the viewpoint of the other university.
And you said that also the CDHO process is important also for internal purposes, but then what exactly did you mean with that? Like, what were you thinking about?
Well, sometimes, for instance, you have to check whether companies at the labor market, whether future employees are interested in the program. And, well, suppose they are not interested, then that would be a problem for the students when they graduate.
Speaking with professionals in the field is always a good thing, even after your program has already started, just to ensure that your program actually keeps meeting demands of the professional field. So if there are any new developments, you may want to change your intended learning outcomes to reflect those developments and to ensure that your graduates will still be employable after they graduate.
Yeah, well, there are two ways to demonstrate the labor market need, or, well, three ways perhaps. The first one is just to read on the internet. The number of vacancies should grow. There are a few organizations, specialized research organizations that have a database. I think it's called JobFeed, and this runs back till 2012. And they can they can look in the database to see if there are
trends.
Trends, yes. But that's quite expensive. I think it costs 20,000 euros to do such an investigation. Well, then there is just the public, the internet search, but for the labor market genomics in society, there are not really specific data. So another option is to have some interviews with possible future employers and to ask them how they feel about the program. And that's what I did. I don't know, I think I did about 25 or 30 interviews.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's about what you need for the CDHO, because just 10 is not convincing enough.
And I remember that when we were arranging for that, we heavily relied on our networks,
Yes.
because also you advised us, look in your domain, like who are the employers that could possibly want your graduate students, you know, and of course then we went into our networks and said, okay, so we know this company, we know this insurer, we know these research groups, we know, et cetera, and those were the people that we actually asked to be interviewed by you.
Yeah.
So a network is really important also to rely on to prove that your program is necessary.
It's always important to think about for what labor market are you working. And what I heard from the CDHO once is that universities are less keen on that than professional universities or applied universities, because they are, they always have internships, for instance, and they have a much better relationship with the labor market. And so for them it's easier usually to think about people to interview. So that's a thing universities could learn from the applied universities, to have a better eye for the possible labor market.
And also what you helped us out with is in order to get a good funding for our program, we had to choose a category.
Oh yeah.
Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, well, there are 3 levels of funding in Holland. So there is the top funding, which is only for the medical programs. And then there is the high funding, which is for the science programs usually, and the regular funding, which is for the social sciences. So in your application, you have to specify which type of category, the CROHO category or the HOPE category, you belong to. So when you say social science, the chances are very small that you will get the high level of funding. Mm-hmm. So it may help to choose an appropriate category. So nature or technique or interdisciplinary is also sometimes a high funding. Mm-hmm. But I don't know exactly who decides on the level of funding. That's somewhere at the ministry, I think.
Mm. So maybe you can think of what new things are coming up for this CDHO.
So I think it's by June 23 there will be a new framework for the CDHO, and the labour market relevance that will just stay. They will integrate the scientific relevance and the societal relevance with the labour market relevance. So there's just one criterion. But the most important difference is that they want to reduce the number of new programs because there are too many, at least that's what the ministry thinks or what the CDHO thinks. There are too many new programs, which makes the landscape of programs a little bit diffuse, and it's difficult for students to choose. So a new thing you have to demonstrate is that you can't develop the program within an existing program. So you can't introduce a new track in one of the existing programs. And only when the track option is not available, you can start a new program.
I also remember when we were setting up the program, a number of people were saying the same thing that you said now for the new CDHO requirements, that we might prefer to make a track in an existing program.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and also from internal an internal perspective, a number of people were saying that because it would be much more feasible, less costly, less labor intensive, and we might still achieve our ambitions. But we have made a strong case saying that actually it's such a new interdisciplinary field of research that if we're not going to address all of the domains and give all the knowledge that we were going to give to students, we really need 120 EC to educate our students to be able to become those professionals, those bridge builders that would never be served with a track.
Yeah. And I think it was also difficult to for the ideas you had on the curriculum, because there was a large project.
Yes. The Genomics and the City assignment.
Yeah. Well, and since there was no project in any of the other research master programs, it was very difficult to integrate in an existing program.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct.
So a new program was your only
option.
Really real option. Yes. Apart from changing your curriculum, which is a little bit. A pity, I think.
Mm-hmm. And there was also a discussion with, I think it was Manfred. Mm-hmm. Manfred said that we wanted, it would be preferable to have students who didn't want to do a PhD because we want to make a more specialized generalist. And I remember that there was also something you had to take into account when you were doing your research, because you had to seek a few employees within the academic world, but also a lot out of there. Yeah.
Because when you say that the program educates for a PhD, then the academic world is one of the possible employers, of course. But the people who are not going to do the PhD, well, they have to find a job elsewhere. So those are two parts of the labor market you have to address in the interviews. I do remember one thing that we didn't mention yet, but that's something you should do. and not what you shouldn't do. When you start preparing your CDAO document, it's always a good idea to have an interview with the CDHO, and just to check with them how they feel about the program. So they will. I don't remember whether we did it. No? Okay, but that's something they advised later to do that always. Because in the first place, the CDHO, they like to know what's coming up for their own planning. But in the second place, they will also, well, it will always give you an idea whether how they feel about the program. So that's perhaps what we should have done, to have this conversation with the CDAO, and which we didn't. That would have reduced our uncertainty, perhaps, our hesitation. Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming here and looking back with us on how we did it as Genomics in Society, but also for all the tips and tricks that you gave for programs to come. And also, thank you, Esther, for being here.
It was a pleasure.
So what really struck me in this conversation was that even though you were talking about funding, which is generally very competitive, there was also the spirit of collaboration as well. So how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting difference, because when you're submitting research proposals, you are going to compete against your colleagues, and only one of you gets the money. But the way we approached it here was to do an analysis of who was doing similar educational programs, and only one stood out. And Desiree advised us, go to them. Have a conversation and see whether they're going to object to your program, because that's the way it's set up in the Netherlands. The CDHO is going to announce that there is a new educational program and invites all of the educational programs to make an objection if they feel that they're doing the same thing. We listened to her carefully, and we approached this similar program, and we said, look, this is our plan. What do you think of it? And they were really happy. They said, oh, this is precisely what's missing in our program. So we're being complementary here. Up to the point where now our first cohort, they're going to go into the second year. They're going to do electives in their program and vice versa. So we're really bringing it to life.
It's really about reaching out, getting off of your island, getting out of isolation, really, to start that collaboration and complement each other.
Yeah, and even more so for demonstrating a labor market that's not there yet, because you're creating a new kind of professional profile. So we heavily relied on our networks so that Desiree knew who she could interview as potential employers of our graduates. And if you think my network is not big enough, actually your network is all of the networks of the people in your team. So it also includes the network of your institute, the network of the head of your department, and so forth. So actually you have a lot bigger network than you might expect, and you have to make use of it.
And speaking of the institute, of course, it's very good to reach out to external parties, but also to really check what is the climate in my own institute for an application like this. Because there had been an application before us that had been rejected, which really influenced the way the institute tackled our application as well. How did you experience that?
Yeah, I would qualify it as institutional anxiety. Like, everybody was on edge and very nervous. So instead of saying like, oh, go for it, we're ready, let's do it, people were saying, no, we're not ready, we cannot do this, it's not good enough yet, because we're gonna be rejected, we're gonna fail. And it's up or out. Without the funding, you're not gonna do it. It's really intimidating. So here again, Desiree was quite firm, and she said, look, you have to apply, you can keep on improving, but you don't know what they're looking for at this point, so you have to try it. You cannot go on forever. She invited us to sort of ignore the institutional anxiety and to rely on our own enthusiasm and on our faith and go ahead with it. And then we got a green light, and it came back with even more arguments of why it was a really good idea than we actually submitted. So that was quite a victory.
And also getting that green light and getting back, more arguments even to get started with this program was a real good motivation to start designing the curriculum, because then we have our most important lifeline. So in the next conversation, we'll be talking about the design of that curriculum and how to tackle that. In this this next conversation, we'll talk about curriculum design. So once you've secured your funding, you have to actually design a program. How do you mobilize the right people for that? And also, how do you make sure that they're equipped with the necessary tools to start designing? I'm a core teacher myself in the program and was involved at this point. And for me, it was quite difficult to move from this concept of a course on paper to an actual course where you have to design learning activities, assessments, etc. So in this conversation, we'll talk with Otse Bersma, who is a researcher in gene therapy and a teacher. We'll talk with Chris Stabel, who is head of RISBO at Erasmus University. And we'll talk with Rachel Lichtvoet, who is an educational advisor.
So good morning, guys. It's really great to have you here. Today we would like to reflect on how the curriculum of Genomics in Society was designed. And actually there were a few parallel design processes going on. The designing of the curriculum of year one took place in parallel to actually the designing of the Genomics in the City assignment, which is a big course in year one and has a number of innovative elements to it. And we applied for funding at the Community for Learning and Innovation for the Genomics in the City assignment. And the design of the year one curriculum was part of a senior university teaching trajectory in which you were involved as a coach. And you were involved in the CLI project for designing Genomics in the City. At some point, you became the coordinator and you played a big part in programmatic assessment and also implementing that in an e-portfolio. You were always there everywhere. So yeah, that's a brief introduction. So it would be nice if we could just, inspect those parallel processes and see how the blueprints were created and how they were brought to life.
Well, maybe it's a bit of a broad question, but an important one. Where do you actually start with something like this? How do you create the conditions that you can start working on this big question of what is my curriculum going to look like?
It all starts with vision, and it all starts with an idea. And for us, the Community for Learning and Innovation, I think it is important to really ask for these applicants first, what is your vision, what is your idea, what do you want to achieve? And next to a vision, there's also a strategy out there. And basically, you would expect that faculties or universities, they have a strategy about what their education looks like and how they impact their students and what kind of students they deliver for society. If those two match, if your own vision of what you want to achieve with your students matches the strategy of the Erasmus University or of the faculty here, the medical center, I think these are things that we can fund, and we have to fund, I think, because this is what our societal relevance is as an educational institute. We have to fund projects that impact the lives of our students, and if we have delivered good students, those people impact the lives of other people, of course. There are some other reasons, of course, that needs to be also of a kind of overarching relevance. So we could fund this because what you would implement would be relevant for other faculties as well. Mm-hmm. So they could learn from things as design thinking, as programmatic assessment. And now, 3 years into the process, we actually see other faculties taking over programmatic assessment and design thinking in their teaching. So one way or the other, maybe you guys were all pioneering, and everybody else should be thankful for you trying to making that step.
Yeah, it was really nice when we first heard about this idea, because it was so open yet, and there was so much to design and develop, and we always love to do that in co-creation with as many experts from different fields as possible. So with this project, that was really the core idea when we started. So we were very happy that we could participate as the ones that could help on the designing and developing process, but many other people were involved from their field of expertise as well. And the fact that the mission and vision was already very clear because of this pre-process in the CLI also helped us, I think, to make a really clear or a kickstart with developing, because when we started developing, we want to start with the end in mind. So what do we want to achieve with this whole master, and what kind of professional do we want to deliver in the end? And that was for us the starting process to start thinking about, okay, then what kind of activities do we need, and what kind of assessments indeed do we need to make it as innovative and creative but also effective as possible. Mm-hmm. So it was really nice to do that in a team with everybody that we need.
Mm-hmm. And looking back on creating the blueprint of the Genomics in the City assignment, can you discern certain important steps or milestones that were in there?
Yeah, I think there were really clear separate steps that we went through. So of course it started with this end result, thinking about what we want to achieve, and then we had some really nice storyboarding sessions. That was really creative with sticky notes and flip posters all over the rooms to really think about, okay, if we want to achieve this with our learners, then first, what kind of learning activities are we going to provide these learners to give them the opportunity to practice these skills? But also then what kind of resources like videos and other materials do we need to create to help them a little bit? Mm-hmm. The kind of support that we need to give them to guide them towards their learning process. And also the evaluation points in between, in different stages of the assignment in this case, so that the students get enough feedback to adjust their learning process. So it was really like structurally go through all these different aspects that we needed. And then we had a nice blueprint. And the second step was that we had all the future teachers that will be part of the master in a university teaching qualification. And I think that was also really nice because in this trajectory the teachers not only learned how to formulate learning objectives and make a course plan and think about assessment, but they also really developed it immediately for their own course. So they ended up with a teaching certificate and their own course plan. Mm-hmm. So I think these were three important steps in the process that that we went through with each other.
Yeah, actually that was super efficient. Yeah. Because that allowed the entire curriculum to be developed in coherence.
Yeah, and they did it together in one group and they could immediately...
At the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So Rachel was just referring to the creation of the blueprints of the courses of year one, in which all of the core teachers of year one enrolled together as a cohort, as students actually. Can you tell what that yielded for you, what that meant for the designing of a curriculum together?
So it was extremely valuable in many different ways. So first of all, you mentioned it, Rachel, that after that UTQ, you don't only have a much more structured idea of how can I design my education, but you also have a blueprint for your course, somewhere to start from. And if I look back at the blueprint and the way my course is now, it's completely different. But having that sort of seed that can grow into that course is just extremely valuable. And also doing the UTQ together with all of the core teachers also creates this, of course you're working on your own course, but you're doing that as a group, working on each other's courses, also giving feedback on each other's courses. So I think there we also built really sort of a group feeling and also sort of a group vision on how we would like to design and deliver this education. And I think that would have been much more difficult had we not been all enrolled in the UTQ.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Being in the UTQ, I think for me it was one of the most valuable courses I ever had. It's just a couple of sessions, but you really get information every time and a lot of information. And it's also my first experience as a teacher. So I learned a lot about how to teach, and in this case, programmatic assessment and how to apply it. And of course, we did some peer reviewing there as well. So you immediately teach how to give feedback. And setting up your own course is very nice, but it also helped us all to as a building block to set up the Genomics in the City assignment as well. Where we also implemented a lot of the things we've learned in the UTQ trajectory. So very valuable for us.
So looking back and having in mind the people who might be watching this video, is there like a more general advice that you could get from this?
I think the main thing you have to do when you design a curriculum is to do it as a holistic event. It needs to be a holistic approach. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times curriculums are designed according to expertise of teachers and books, and at the end you have like lecture and a final assessment and lecture, and those things don't really connect to each other. But what you guys did was work together in building this curriculum within the training session, which made it very constructively aligned and holistically designed at the end. So it ended up, I think, as like a very robust, a very much connected curriculum.
Yeah, if I can add to that, because this holistic approach was also needed because the students that we're aimed to educate, what they will be at the end of the master is not there yet. So it's not written in books. It's not. So we really have to work together from our different points of expertise to educate them in the way that we have foreseen at the beginning. So otherwise, we wouldn't even be able to do it if we wouldn't collaborate on this together. So,
what do you think?
Yeah, I was by this discussion thinking about that throughout the process of designing this master, it was at some point maybe very chaotic or overwhelming for everybody that was involved, because it was a very innovative process that we had. We had everybody at the same time in the same room to think about the very beginning stages of this blueprints, and maybe the people were more inclined or hoped that maybe first we would do this course and then that course and then it would be more
serial.
Yeah, exactly. But that was not the way we worked. We just started and thinking about the learning objective, for example, with everybody in the room from different disciplines at the same time, because that is the way to make it holistic. But that also means that the journey was very unclear. So I think we had to do a lot with acceptance of insecurities, that we didn't know how the journey would look like. We had to take side steps and go back to the beginning sometimes to make it a really holistic, interdisciplinary master or assignment in this case. But what really helped is that we felt that all the teachers that were involved, they had some fire in them to make this happen.
So what do you typically do then to spark that fire that you see, or to fuel it? And when you see that the teachers, they're struggling with, you know, the chaos, like, are there things that you could recommend? Like,
I think it's very important if you keep believing in the plan that you have and try to share your own enthusiasm for it, and you could do it very well. There were some very enthusiastic people in the team that was contagious. Everybody could follow, even though maybe you are on a point that you yourself don't really believe in it anymore. Then it really helps if the team is still looking towards the end and believes in it. So that really helps. And just talk about the insecurities that you have during the process and help each other. For example, in the UTQ, it could really help that you have other teachers in your cohort that maybe are also struggling and don't know how to fit their course with the rest of the courses in the master. But it helps if you can talk about it with each other and share it, because it's normal that you have these feelings as well during the process. But enthusiasm, the clear vision, talk about why are we doing this anyway? Why did we start this whole process anyway? Throughout the process many times, that really helped, I think. And during the process, it becomes more and more concrete. You have some concrete products during the process, not only at the end, but in between you also already see, oh, this is how the assignment could look like, or oh, these are the videos that we're going to use.
The ceremonies for the UTQ?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it becomes very visible what you're working on, and I think that's, yeah, did that help you, that you could see what you were thinking about on paper or on videos?
I mean, for me, it was really kind of nerve-wracking at certain points, just because you haven't done it before. So starting it really, starting from scratch is difficult. But when we are a little bit further now and we see it being implemented and it works actually, so that's really nice. So I've gotten I've gotten much more secure about my insecurities, basically.
So one of the things that we have been discussing here a lot, and what I see happen is that we constantly think about what we as teachers need to do to make things happen, and what we did to facilitate learning and teaching. But I consider it that we are like the architects and we are setting the stage, but eventually it's our students that need to do the work. And we have to keep that in mind. You're not doing this for you. You're doing this for your students. And if you have a bad time or you think everything is going to get too complex, think about your students and keep them in mind when you're teaching.
Yeah, and sometimes you can do something like a student journey to make that very tangible. So we did that for Genomics in the City. I remember we were in this room and we were going through every step of the course, thinking, okay, how would we feel if we were in student shoes now? And so we thought, at this point we would be super excited. At this point we would be confused. So what would the students need then? And then up there come the videos. And then at this point, they will probably be very frustrated with each other. So here we plan coaching and intervision to address like the group dynamics and dive into how can we make that work for us. And now in reality, when we see how the course is running, we see that those moments, for instance, of intervision, they're exactly rightly timed. It's when they were struggling the most and when they were completely stuck. And then we could say, why doesn't this work? So that student journey really allowed us to have the students in mind, but also to feel their struggles and to feel their excitement and to, it's beautiful to see how that actually works out.
And this was also really nice about, sketching that educational vision in the UTQ, because it really, for me at least, sort of was a moment where I sort of was confronted with, indeed, but who am I as a teacher? What do I want to teach my students? And that indeed it's not just, because when you're a younger teacher, you don't have a lot of experience, you might feel this pressure of, I have to convey all of this knowledge in the exact right and correct way, because if I don't, then I'll be a bad teacher. But being a teacher is about much more than that. It's really about, there's not necessarily that pressure on me, but I have to motivate my students. I have to make sure that they're curious, that they're self-sufficient in a way, that they don't have to rely on me for all of that information. And once I got to that point, that was such a relief, actually. It was like, I don't have to do all of this myself. The students can do the work as well. And all that has to be possible is the consultation. They have to be able to consult me. But that doesn't mean I need to have all of the answers ready. And then sort of being put on the spot and thinking about, what is my educational vision? Who am I as a teacher? Really sort of allowed me to think about that and reach that realization, which has made teaching all the more fun ever since.
So I think listening to the nice conversation that we just had, I came to the realization that, when you start designing a curriculum, the way that you collaborate and the help that you seek and the consultations that you do and the virtues that you make use of and develop together and as a person, they're all really important because they will actually become the educational climate of the program. So you have to be very mindful and cherish that, the way that you do that. So to think about how are we doing this and how are we involving each other and how are we collaborating and how are we reaching out, how are we acknowledging the things that we don't know, that we need others for, to also give that place in the educational climate. Well, thank you so much for making the time to reflect here in this office today and to co-create an understanding of how to create a curriculum together.
Thanks. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
So that was a really interesting conversation to watch with all these people involved from different roles and responsibilities. And what stood out to me is that when you're all developing simultaneously, but you have to create a coherent curriculum, I guess it's really difficult to imagine what the endpoints will be of all those courses. And I can also imagine it could be quite chaotic. What was it like for you?
Well, yeah, so the start of that process is very chaotic because you're not only worried about your own course, but also how does it align with all of the other courses. But I think a huge advantage of working together as a teacher team, say through a UTQ, developing your courses together, you really get an inside look on how these courses are being designed, what kind of learning activities the teachers are using, what kind of assessments the teachers are using, and that gives you an opportunity to discuss with each other. And this is really insightful because it does give you an idea of where are my students at, what other things are they learning, and how can I plug into that. For me, that was especially interesting because I was designing an ethics course, which I think plugs into everything. Then again, if you're educating interdisciplinary researchers, then you really want to take that step from multidisciplinary to interdisciplinary. So not just lots of courses next to each other, but courses that plug into each other, that are interwoven to a certain extent.
So what would you recommend the next team of developers? How should they approach like co-creating the courses?
I would say look at what everyone is doing, but also try and zoom in a little bit. So also think about what kind of assessments are other people doing in their courses and how can I complement that? So it's really good to think about these kinds of things. If maybe one person does a presentation, another one does a multiple choice exam, another one does an essay, for example, or more creative forms of assessment. So it really gives you a nice opportunity not just to design a course, but to design a curriculum together.
Yeah. Yeah, and also it sounds like a bit of a marathon. You know, you really have to keep up your spirits while you're doing it. So what helped you? Like, what made you move forward?
Several things helped me there. So also keeping in mind the end point that this course is what's going to lead me into a classroom with students who are going to interact with me, and we're going to have a lot of fun with the education together. On the other hand, I also learned fairly quickly that doing, for example, a UTQ is more about gathering the tools necessary to design and provide education rather than you're going to refine your course concept into a finished course and then that's it. Once I have students and I'm in that classroom, I can just test things, I can experiment a bit, and together with my students refine the course even further. I don't have to do all of that right now. And I think that was a very comforting thought as well.
Yeah, so actually, you know, just to summarize what you're saying and what we saw in the conversation is the importance of a capacity building, like to equip your teachers with the right knowledge and the right tools, but also with the right opportunities to collaborate, to create the curriculum in coherence.
Absolutely, and what worked there as well is doing all of these activities together as teachers was the start of the climate of the Masters itself. So having done all of that together, being familiar with each other's courses, but also maybe with each other's insecurities and vulnerabilities, that really helped us warm up to each other. And to this day, I think that fostered a climate where we have each other's backs, where we help each other out, and we know what everyone is doing, more or less, well enough to help them if they need it.
So I think it's really practical and strategic to check in your organization what is in place to professionalize teachers and how can you disclose those resources? What's necessary for that? Chris was also saying something very important, and that's to also have your student, always have your student in mind while developing. And Binneke has some very important things to say about keeping your student in mind while designing your program. So let's listen to that.
Then I was so curious to know, so what surprised you, because you're working with students now, what turned out differently than the way that you designed it?
Whoa, that was actually the one thing that everyone was already predicting, everyone knowledgeable. Like, so if you think you understand the study load for the students, multiply by 3. Yeah. And that actually was true. Well, we were sort of worried like, oh, is our programs not going to be too light for a research master? But then with everybody's enthusiasm, the program is really, really heavy. If we would have listened earlier to what everybody was saying without having our first experiences, we could have just downsized the study load by 30%. That would have been much better, and it would still be a heavy program. So that's what we're doing now for next year. Like,
yeah, that was my question, because sometimes people have this odd idea that in one time you have a program. That's not true, right?
Of course not. No. No. You keep on developing. You're never finished, I think.
When I used to design a lot of programs, I would always start with what situations are students confronted with once they're finished with that program. So I always start at the end. And then I go back to the regulations, and what it needs is structure. Now you can either structure the courses, but it gets you stuck, right? And if you're truly innovative, often that doesn't work. But if that is not your organizing principle, then what is? Now for you, that was the student journey. And in that student journey, there were particular steps. Now each step has behavior, but also has like knowledge and insight. So how do I structure that? And that is the most important, and that's always referred to as the second standard, but that isn't important. But what you should know is that student journey should fit the labor market and also the point of entry of that student. And then there's these examinations, and it's really a tough criteria in the Netherlands, that these examinations should fit your level and orientation, and your examination should fit the learning journey that you've just been designing. And if there's a misfit, between the examinations and the learning journey, or between the learning journey and the level and orientation of your program, it won't work. Finally, I would always have like a student committee, and if I would have colleagues that would react a bit cynical or negative, I even would ask them to counter-design things that I would design, just to sharpen the focus of that program. So there are lots of ways how you can deal with red tape or negativity or people not believing in your ideas.
So Bineke is talking about a student journey, but what exactly is a student journey? There's multiple ways actually in which you take your student in mind while you're researching a research master's. The first one is actually, who am I making this research master's for? Who am I designing for? So how will my student feel throughout different points of the research master's, and how can we accommodate these feelings? How can we make sure that the student navigates the whole program comfortably? Another important aspect of student journey is, what kind of student am I actually looking for? It's very important to think about what kind of student you want to attract, what their profile is, and also where you can find them and inform them about your program. So you have to make sure to design an admissions procedure that fits the purpose of your research master's. For us, what we did is focus on the narrative CV rather than a more traditional CV which lists achievements. In the narrative CV, we want to make sure that a student exhibits the things that they want to exhibit about themselves, what they think makes them a good match for our program. But more importantly, during the admissions procedure, we want to make sure that we as a program are a good match for the student and that we can offer them what they need in their educational experience. Now, at the end of all of these student journeys lies one thing, which is a diploma. But we have to make sure that that diploma actually means something. And for that, we need to get accreditation. And in the Netherlands, we get that from the NVAO. During this accreditation procedure, there's many questions such as, how do you apply for that? How do you prepare for that? And what kind of conversations do you need to be having? In the next conversation, we'll talk to Rietje de Jong, who is an educational advisor. We'll talk to Liz Lurer, a teacher and researcher. So let's have a look.
So good morning. It's really great to have you here to reflect upon the accreditation process. And I think it would be really nice to see like what happens in an accreditation process, what were your roles in there, but also how can you take charge of such an intimidating thing where it's really all or nothing. Like you either make sure that the diploma of your students is worth something, or they say, nah, this isn't worth anything. Start with, what was your role in Rietje?
My role, my main role was in the preparation of the accreditation, in helping developing the dossier.
Like this one, right here?
That one, yes, very nice, yeah. I switched roles and became a member of the panel because I have been secretary of accreditation panels. So I know the process from the different side. So that was quite different for me, and I became really a little bit nervous by meeting the panel and have to answer their questions, not knowing what that will be.
So what was your role in this?
So I was a core teacher for the program, so part of what I was doing was helping develop the program. So I was developing my course for the master's program, which is Governance in Genomics, and helping with the team developing the GATC assignment. And then we also got to take part in also the site visit of the NVAO accreditation. And that was when we were assessing the learning activities and assessment for the students as well. Yeah.
So how did you prepare for that site visit?
I think one of the most useful things that we did in the process of preparing for the site visit was having the mock site visit. And that was a huge help for us. Part of what Rieke was saying is that it's very hard to anticipate what questions the committee will ask. And so learning the types of questions that will come and learning also how you react to it, which was something that I wasn't expecting. I knew what I would want to say for many given questions, imagining what they would be, but in the moment when you're interacting with your peers and you feel very passionate about what you want to sell for the program that you really believe in, it is important to also practice how you respond, what level of energy that you have common language with your peers and with the community when sharing that to external people. And that worked out really well, that I could talk with my other peers as well to prepare and think who's going to answer what questions. And I think on the actual day, we did much better complimenting each other. So if someone left something out, or that we each could add something to the conversation for each question, and to help diffuse situations as well, if you could see that it was starting to go maybe in a direction where someone might get defensive. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And did you also make arrangements for who was going to divide the questions amongst the interviewees, or?
Yeah, I think we did discuss that a bit, yeah.
Especially for who will start.
Yep. And I think we did pretty good in the actual interview as well, if we knew who would be very good at answering questions. So if it was something that we hadn't pre-planned or discussed, was almost apparent immediately, and someone would say, oh boy, I think you should take this question, or Dircha, or Rikyo, this seems like a perfect question for you to answer. So we were also helping each other out in that process, yeah.
Yeah, so you also displayed that, you know, we know what each of us is bringing to the table, and definitely. That also shows leadership there.
Yeah, and cohesion as a team. I think that we were working together, and we really know what our strengths are and what each person is bringing to this team, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what was another thing that the mock site visits yielded as an insight? What was the point of, you know, you have to work on this, guys?
Yeah, I think probably one of the other things that came up was using a unified language and really clearly defining terms for the core teachers, but also for the panel. So before the actual visit, we could provide kind of an appendix with a dictionary of these are the terms that we use a lot. And we actually think we're using them in a very intentional and correct way. But if you're not used to hearing these words, then you might not understand the subtle nuance and difference between them in different contexts.
Yeah, so in terms of the mock, you know, the practice of the site visit, how do you get a panel for that? And what are the criteria to select the right panel? How do you do that?
For the accreditation, there need to be a panel of peers and with an international component and so on, and with different expertise. And that's what we are looking for the mock exam. So we discuss with each other who knows someone who is an expert in that field. And in the mock exam, mock accreditation, we need a chairman who is very critical and not think from, okay, it will be all right, but pinpoints the problems.
And what I was a little bit surprised about, but actually in hindsight is logical, but we also had to put in a list of names of for the real panel members. Yeah. And so it turned out that we had to have like independent panel members, but also we had the opportunity to then think, okay, so who's really knowledgeable about programmatic assessment? Who's really, you know, knowledgeable about the ethics of genomics, and who's in our network? And so we could ask, you know, people in important places, like, do you know anyone? And can you give a few names? Yeah. And that actually helped us to put together a really nice panel.
Yeah, that's right.
Lovely.
Yeah.
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 Sam, can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. A lot of this process, we spent so long developing this program together, and then you get to the accreditation step, which is the final step, especially the site visit, and it can feel like all of this work that you've put into the program suddenly feels out of your control. So what were the ways that you felt like you could maintain a sense of control, or what you could control in this process?
Well, the thing is that we had a person in our team who had previously worked for the NVO, so for the accreditation body. So she really knew how to communicate with the NVO also beforehand. So she was very communicative about, you know, who's going to be the panel members, about any delays, because we had delay after delay after delay from the accreditation side. then while we were doing the site visit, which was during 2 days, it was absolutely nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
But she was always there to coach us and say, okay, so what's important now is this, this, and this.
Yeah.
So what they're probably not happy about is this and that. So Sam, you need to take care of that and do this and this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we really had a coach there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another challenge of it is that not all of us are in every session with the panel as well. And so then also knowing what was being said or what came up or what was the sticking point in each of these individual conversations and discussions, I think was also useful to try to create a thread across the people working together on the site visit. Yeah.
So the NVO is looking at 3 standards, what they call it, actually 3 criteria. Could you just explain a little bit what those 3 are about?
Yeah. So standard 1 is there must be a clear set of competencies, intended learning outcomes in terms of MVAO, and they have to be connected with the international field, with the professional field. They have to be embedded. Then the second standard is about the teaching learning environment, and that's also your intentions. What is your idea, your vision about learning? What's the blueprint of the program? How are the courses aligned? All these things, and the quality of the staff. That are the important topics of standard 2. And standard 3 is assessment, student assessment. You have to be very clear about assessment methods, assessment policy, and how assessment is integrated in courses and in course manuals.
Looking back, I think, yes, there were these 3 standards, but maybe in the subtitles, actually the big question was, are they going to be able to do this?
Yeah.
Is this the right team to do this program?
Yeah. We were all quite sure that we could. But so we were surprised by the accreditation panel about one topic, and that was personnel policy. Because it's a new team. Could they do this? Will there be enough seniority? So we were so convinced about the seniority. But so we have to shift and to explain.
Yeah, and reframe the advantage of the perspective of having a young team in that this is a new field, an innovative field, and we're trying to merge some pretty new concepts as well. So I would say, maybe more broadly speaking in an accreditation terms, is knowing that whatever is unique and new and different about your program is also probably going to be where there's a sticking point with the committee, and that's also your opportunity to highlight what is novel and important about your program. So it's a bit of the double-edged sword that you can learn to work to your advantage.
Yeah, but this person who was so knowledgeable about accreditation, she also took charge of that.
Yeah.
She was saying, okay, if the panel is not happy with juniority, then we need to propose a way to fix it, and let's be proactive about that. Let's not wait for them to come up with an advice.
Right.
Let's propose a solution.
And we have to discuss in between that day with management, with exam committee, how could we arrange that? And we did.
So you were being a secretary of the NVO accreditation in different programs and being an independent expert. Were there best practices or also mistakes that you then also took away from?
Yeah, I think so. I think the main point is the element of team building. Early in the process, with stakeholders, society stakeholders and teachers and all kind of experts, to discuss the intended learning outcomes, to discuss the profile, to discuss kind of blueprint, what do we think about the program. To have these discussions with a lot of people is very important. We couldn't do this alone or do this too much and then ask the teachers, what do you think about it? Then it's not their process. And it needs to be their process. So co-creation was very important.
Yeah, and I think, again, going back to even simple things, so even with this team of constructive alignment, having the mock accreditation process, the mock interviews, was incredibly helpful for us as a team to see, even if we all had been working really well and we had this clear vision, how can we make this more clear for people on the outside? How can we make sure that our language is consistent and deliberate and clear, and what are the points that we want to focus on when we're talking with external panels? And that was incredibly helpful for us to have those discussions and to practice going through it together. Because it's always different when you're sitting in your room talking around and when you're in an interview process. I think anyone who's done a job interview or done a media interview understands it's a little bit different once you have an external party involved and you can't anticipate what they're going to ask you and what's going to happen. Yeah, so
you're triggering me because you're saying like a media interview.
Yeah.
What really struck me when I first did one was that I was just answering the questions.
Yeah.
But because of that, I didn't tell my story.
Yeah.
So you quickly learn after that. So no matter what question you get, yes, make your answer connected to that question, but also don't forget to tell your story. What's your narrative?
The answer to the question you wish was asked.
Indeed. It's also a way of taking charge, like being certain that you as a team are like, okay, what is this interview? What should it display? What are the main takeaways from this interview that the panel should hear? And make sure that it's being spoken out, so that no matter what the questions were, the story would be told.
And I think we did a good job of that in the end. It worked out well. Yeah.
Wow. We're running the program, so yeah. Well, okay. I think we covered everything that we should cover. So we'd like to thank you very much for this really insightful and nice conversation.
Thank you for the memories.
So that accreditation was nerve-wracking. What an experience.
You can say that, yeah, it was very, very nerve-wracking. But on the other hand, I felt we were prepared as well as we could have been, which was very important.
One of the things that we did that really prepared us to know what language to use and to know that we had the right people was the mock interview. And for that, we relied on our networks.
So having that group of, critical friends was essential to the success of the accreditation. Also because they could almost be stricter even than the real accreditation would be, because they knew that's what they were helping out for. Being under that magnifying glass was, on the one hand, terrible, because you get a lot of critiques that you're not necessarily expecting. But on the other hand, it's so valuable and so essential for once you start to do the actual accreditation. So for example, the fact that apparently the course coordinators were expected to already have completed their PhDs, when in fact some course coordinators, including me, had not yet done so. So that was actually a fairly big obstacle. So what happened there?
During this accreditation process, which took place in two days, this happened the first day, we were so anxious. We were really, really nervous, and it felt like this whole accreditation thing was sort of slipping through our fingers, right? That we could potentially not make it. But I think the turning point there was that our quality assurance expert was saying, well, we have an opportunity here. We heard the panel. What solutions can we come up with ourselves that the panel can be satisfied with? And instead of waiting for the panel to ask for it, we proactively said, we want to make use of that 15-minute time slot for any, leftovers, because we have something important to discuss with you. And that was actually quite convincing, because we had an opportunity to show some leadership there. Whereas had it been super smooth, maybe we hadn't been able to show that leadership then. So, yeah.
And in that procedure, it's not all about attitude, but also about knowing exactly what's going on across these days of accreditation, because many different conversations are happening very quickly, one after the other, with lots of people involved. How do you take charge then? How do you basically control something like that?
Have the right people for the right interview. So we did swap some people there after the mock interview, and also the mock panel confronted us with, oh, you're not seeing the same things here. You're not speaking the same language, which actually is so important when you're trying to sell your product. So we actually really needed a mission control to check with every group that had been interviewed, okay, what went well? When were the panels smiling? When were they not smiling? What was your gut feeling? When did you get the feeling that they were happy with your answer, but which answers were still doubtful? And putting everything together, we could make sort of a proactive, proposal for solutions. And the panel really appreciated that. That was really a turning point in the accreditation phase. Yeah. So this fine line between being in charge, but also being open to improving, it's something you have to look for actively during such a process.
Yeah.
And in the end,
we got our accreditation. Yeah, and that was a huge, huge relief. You know, it's 2 days where you're just constantly feeling nerve-wracked, doing everything you can to make it work, and then to hear that you do get your accreditation is such a wonderful milestone in the process.
Yes, and going through such a nerve-wracking experience together, where you're really holding on to each other, like holding your breath and then being relieved, it makes you a team. And you know, when you are past that point of having your green light, then you have to start implementing your educational program within the organization. And being a team really helps to be able to navigate that task as well. And that's where the small school comes in as a very important thing to have.
How do you make sure that once your research master takes off, everyone has a sense of belonging, that everyone knows where to go if they have questions or need something? How do you make an environment in which it's acceptable to make mistakes, in which you can comfortably make mistakes? In the next conversation, we'll talk to Doreen Heiltjes, who is a student counselor, and Frauke and Otze will be joining us again. Today we're going to have a conversation about the small school approach, something that's been quite central in the development of genomics in society. And we're just going to take it apart a little bit. What do we mean by small school approach? How can you implement something like that? Do you let it happen? Do you actively steer that? Let's talk about it. First of all, maybe a good question to start off with is, why do we want to describe ourselves as a small school? Or why is that something we're aiming for?
With the small school is actually based on certain principles. So short lines of communication, trust, room for growth, and not just room for growth for students, but everyone involved in the program. It's quite difficult if you're working in a very, very large organization to actually maintain that small school approach where people can easily find each other and work together to achieve the same goals. So that's why we thought of a structure, how we can bring that together. It is important within your small school approach that people can easily find each other. So there's regular communication. It doesn't have to be formal or frequent meetings that are fixed every month or whatever frequency, but that you maintain regular contact, that you are open to new ideas, where there's a safe environment for everyone to speak out, to provide feedback, but also to receive feedback. And I guess that is what the small school approach is about. And it is a constant dialogue to actually maintain that with each other.
You can imagine a small school is a cozy building where you know the janitor, you know the person that picks up the phone, all the teachers know the students and vice versa, and you actually know everyone who works there, and you really feel like you belong there. So we came up with small school, and also we needed a one-liner for that. So the small school is a place where you feel at home, where everybody knows your name, and the small school takes care of the well-being of an educational program and all its participants.
Cool. So actually by strongly valuing the relationships that emerged during the development of the master, the small school approach emerged alongside of it, basically. Cool. So Elsa, I'm wondering, how did you experience that as a teacher during the development? Did you also feel that suddenly the small school emerged? How was that for you?
Yes, so for me it's a very similar feeling indeed. It's like from the moment that we went into these scrums, that I joined these scrums, it was very clear that we were all putting this master together with each other, and that I really appreciate it. I mean, you really know for which problem you can go to which person, and with that I also started to use the Scrum method when setting up one of the parts of the program, the Genomics and the City assignment. And there we set the same process up with all the core teachers. We came together once a week, so you could hear from each other what everyone was doing, how it was going, and if anyone needed help from each other. And you could also align the different aspects of the assignment towards each other. So we work in different phases. And each phase was aligned with the next one, just like this, and that was really valuable.
Yeah, so this sense of belonging also really translates on different levels of the masters to sort of a shared responsibility for really large tasks that would otherwise be very, very difficult.
Yeah, cool.
And Doreen, what are your experiences with the small school so far?
Yeah, so I actually joined the small school a few months before the program actually started. So I wasn't part of the developing and the scrumming and everything. But as an academic advisor, I'm mostly there for the students if there are any issues. But also, I'm also there as kind of a objective outsider, also to have some discussions with teachers or coordinators if they encounter any issues that may be also affecting the students, and then I can also advise them in that sense. I think it's really something to aspire to for the entire organization.
And also what I'm hearing a bit is that since you're a little bit outside of it, if that sense of belonging is really important, but I can imagine sometimes students don't feel like they belong. So in that sense, you can be our critical friend somewhat, a little on the outside to talk to the students about that. So Elsa, you mentioned Scrum. Could you shortly explain what that is?
It's part of a process of working, which is called Agile, in which you work together with a team on a particular aim, so a particular project. And that project might be a really big project, but it can be divided in small tasks. And those tasks can be performed in a shorter time span. So in the sprint, you have to complete the tasks. But on the other hand, you get if you need the help, you can ask them to your co-workers. And in this way, you really make it a collaborative effort. So the tasks belong to the team, although certain tasks are divided over different people within the team. But it feels like a team effort, and this really helps you to perform at the level that is needed to complete all the tasks. And so this is called the Scrum method. And we used it to complete certain tasks to set up the master program, but also to set up the GATC assignment.
How do you think that contributed to that emergence of the small school?
I think it contributed a lot because in this way you were meeting with the team that had the tasks of setting up the master, and you met them every week. So you really got to know all the people, not only about work but also about personal things. I mean, there were some small discussions, some small talk during these meetings as well, and that really helped a lot to get confidence in each other. And that basically is what the small school is about. So knowing each other, trusting each other, and working with each other to come to a common goal, and that's what happened here.
Yeah, so these sound like some very important characteristics, indeed, of the small school approach. Lots of what you're saying definitely resonates, so having that sort of shared responsibility, but also sense of belonging among the core teachers is very important. Having that, I think, is very valuable, especially starting out in a new program like this, that hasn't been going for years and years, and there's a whole course manual already. It's quite a daunting thing to do, but if you know that, your core teachers fellow core teachers and also other academic staff have your back. That's very valuable. And also not just on the content side of developing a course, but also on the more administrative side. So knowing that I can just invite an educational advisor for a coffee if I want to double check, say, an assessment that I'm planning is extremely valuable, and that I don't have to, you know, go through all of the bureaucracy to get an appointment, perhaps with someone who might review my work and will send me an email 3 weeks later. So that is super valuable to me, because I was quite intimidated by that whole administrative, procedural aspect of teaching. You know, because I think you recognize that, you know, you just want to give your lectures and do your sessions, but you also have to register your grades in the
digital learning environment.
Exactly, digital learning environments, schedules, booking rooms, educational checks of your exams and your assessments. That can be quite scary if you've never done it before, but doing that in the context of a small school makes it not necessarily easier, but definitely more palatable, easier to handle. If that makes sense. When things become a lot less sort of transactional or overly professional, but instead indeed you shift the focus of that relationship that you're building, where you can also voice appreciation and things like forgiveness, for example, where that might sound maybe a bit over the top, but actually it's really important because indeed you are going to end up in situations where you'll be annoyed with each other or where you'll be in trouble and you need each other's help. So it's best to just recognize that, I think, instead of pretend that's never going to happen. Yeah. So I have a bit of a general question, but maybe I'd like to ask you first. So working in a large university hospital, the small school approach is not necessarily the standard. So in education there, you know, there's other systems in place. So how do you make sure that, you know, when developing this, that everyone is on board? Because, you know, I can imagine sometimes there's a bit of resistance there for that setup. So how has your experience been with regards to that?
Yeah, so the small school has emerged bottom up. So it was the people working on the program and on the development that created the relationships and that were starting to call the small school the small school. And it was really fun to see that once it had a name, people were talking about it. So not just the developing team, but also the people, you know, working in parallel to us as a program were mentioning small school. So in parallel, a new medical curriculum is being developed right now, and those developing teams were also saying, the small school is something that can work for us. Let's do that. Let's do that approach. Let's start scrumming. Let's start, you know, meeting. Let's start, you know, naming our relationships. So it was something that appealed to people, and just by us repeating, it became a phenomenon. Because people felt it in their hearts, like, yes, we are a small school. Yes, we can work together like this. Yes, we can see each other, appreciate each other, feel safe together. Of course, we're going to be frustrated, but we do together. We leave no one behind. And so it emerged bottom up. But then Frauke had a really important role in formalizing the small school.
We have peaceful reflection days where we evaluate the program. So we have 3 of those days. We had the first one last November, and it was actually a really good way of talking to students, talking to teachers, the examiners on how things are going. And I think in particular with the new program, this is a really effective way of seeing how your program is being received. It gives you also time to take any interventions. Even if the course isn't going to be taught again next year, the feedback that you get from the first period, you can take it on to the next periods for other teachers to learn from. So that's actually really, really valuable.
And maybe you can tell where Peace for Reflection came from.
I can, yeah. So Peace for Reflection comes from one of our minor students. And she's a Finnish student, and at the end of the minor, we always ask students to deliver something or to present something during a symposium, what was most valuable to them, their most valuable lesson learned, basically, during the minor. And she sort of took this Finnish tradition almost, or Finnish thing of taking peace for something. So peace for dinner, peace for studying, and then during the symposium that sort of translated to a piece for reflection, because during the minor she had learned how to sort of take peace to reflect on things. And immediately that sort of clicked for us, where we thought, wow, this is indeed so important, because this is also what we're asking our students to do during the minor and now also during the master. During some points, for example, during programmatic assessment, to really take the time to sit down and reflect and write down, reflect on your learning experiences so far. And that's not just a list of notes from a particular lecture, but really reflecting on the process of learning itself. So what was a really awesome mistake that you made, that you learned from, and how does that relate to the learning goals of the course, but also how does that relate to your own personal learning goals? So we took that piece for reflection and implemented that also in sort of evaluating our master's program, where with the small school, with all people involved, we take days where we have time, despite busy agendas, we just have time to reflect on, say, a particular course or the master's itself, or how the students are feeling. The students are present as well. So we don't just do reflection, but we take actual peace for reflection, which is an essential ingredient if you want to do good reflection that I think a lot of people tend to forget. So it's a very mindful way of evaluating your program, but also with each other, within the small school, within the relationships also of the small school.
Yes, and typically evaluations are maybe done by using surveys or just, per course, evaluate how it's going. And the piece for reflection put us all in the same room with the students, with all the courses of the first period, with the educational advisors, with someone from the examination board. You were even in the room, like student counselors. This allowed us to reflect on how well the program was doing, but in coherence. So instead of just focusing on one course or one aspect, we saw 360 degrees how it was doing, and that also allowed us to, for instance, swap the order of some courses, because it didn't make sense. But it only became apparent because we were having that full view on how the program was doing with all the people involved. What also stood out during this first piece of for reflection session was that the educational advisors in the room, they were really listening and being inspired to take the best practices that they were seeing here back to other educational programs and vice versa. So they said, oh, I have an example from there, maybe that could be applicable to you guys. So it gave us a really rich exchange, and also to be able to listen to all the expertise in the room. The students with their student journey and their experiential knowledge that we couldn't possibly have. But then they could also listen to us and hear our struggles and come up with solutions for us. So it was a back and forth between all participants. And the really nice thing about doing such a qualitative reflection and evaluation is that if you administer it right, then actually for your re-accreditation, which takes place every so many years, you already have all the blocks that you need to look at. You don't have to do 4 years of retrospective analysis and see, oh, how did we do actually? Because you're just doing it along the way. And that also was something that Frauke came up with. Like, if we approach it this way, then it will be really easy for us to do re-accreditations, because we'll have everything ready. It's just a matter of pressing enter and getting everything out of the system.
And I also think that it creates another learning opportunity to learn how to give effective feedback.
Exactly, yeah.
Because in a survey, especially if it's anonymous, then you can maybe just vent your frustrations without being constructive, or as a teacher ask clarification of what exactly would make it better.
Yeah, and this is something, we try to teach our students to operate in an interdisciplinary environment with many different people, building bridges. Mm-hmm. And indeed, in a piece for reflection session, that's basically what you're practicing as well.
Yeah.
Sort of building bridges between all of the people there. And students are present, and they can see that happening between all kinds of stakeholders, but also build some bridges themselves between them and the teachers, or maybe other people involved. Yeah, so that's Two birds, one stone.
And it's also very important to mention that there's to make these pieces for reflection events successful, you need trust in each other. So you need a safe environment where you can share, well, your worries, but also, of course, your flourishes. And in our case, we can use this piece for reflection and the trust that we have in each other to really provide each other indeed with constructive feedback.
Yeah, so I think when you're developing a program, you need a platform for the small school, and in our case that proved to be Scrum. That was a small school platform actually, and now Peace for Reflection and Open Door meetings are the platform for small school.
All right, well, thanks everyone for your contributions and your answers.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, what really stands out to me in this conversation is this quote of the small school is a place where everybody knows your name. And how do you think that having such a thing in place helped us out when we were all of a sudden faced with this huge implementation task after being accredited?
So what really struck me at that moment is that I had to do all of these things that I had never done before or really didn't have any knowledge of either. So you need a comfortable digital learning environment, for example. You need a timetable and you need rooms to teach in, actually. And then you know you're not going to do all of that yourself as a course coordinator, but you're still responsible because you are the contact point, say, for the students. You have to make it happen. So I felt very comfortable knowing that we were moving towards this small school approach, and I think quite early on in the process it did feel like that because I knew who was in charge of the timetables, I knew who was in charge of the digital learning environment, so whenever I had questions, I had email addresses, I could reach these people and they could help me out. And what I liked about that is that I knew who these people were. It wasn't just an email address, but I knew who that person was, what they were doing, and how they had been tagged along so far in the process. And once again, if you want to make that happen, you have to have good relationships with each other because everyone is doing something new. It's quite scary, not just for the teachers, but maybe also for the people making the timetables or the digital learning environment. So you want to have that sense of belonging, that you're doing this together, but also that it's completely acceptable to make mistakes and that you kind of anticipate that because you will make lots and lots of mistakes. Did you make any mistakes?
So many. Oh yes. For instance, the very first time that we had an assessment, we were really late or afraid to be late with entering our exam into the digital environment where it could be like a digital assessment. But so what I did then, in line with small school, I asked for a coffee date with the person in charge of the digital learning environments, and I said, look, I know that I made a mistake and I'm so sorry, but I can also tell you right now I'm going to make many more. So how will you be able to forgive me? What should I do for that? And then he just started to laugh and he was like, of course you're going to make mistakes. What are you thinking? And to make that explicit, that's actually what became sort of the character of our small school. So put a name on it. Also, small school is putting a name on it. So what I hope that you can take away from this is that you can be mindful of how you set up your organization, how you're going to meet each other, how you're going to make agreements, how you're going to be mindful of what win everyone should be able to take away from it, but also how you can put a name on it and how you can make it sustainable instead of just one project, to be in it for the long run. What do you hope that people will take away from it?
I hope that people take away that, you can plan everything as well as you can and that you have everything thought out and waterproofed your entire program, but human relationships, you can't really waterproof these. You can't really plan these. These have to happen organically, but what you can do is facilitate the right conditions for these relationships to flourish. But it takes a little bit of a hands-off approach sometimes rather than, a hands-on. So that's what I hope people will take away.
And it also says something maybe about everyone's leadership in this situation. Because when we're talking about acknowledging all the different fields of expertise that are needed to build the small school, then we're asking a lot of leaders on board. And actually, Bineke was saying some really interesting things about leadership.
Now you're a leader, yeah? So what does it require in terms of leadership? Because I admire you, right? Because you have a way of getting people along, as you did with me. Not for everybody, but what is it that you think makes other people do that? In terms of what is your leadership there?
That's a really difficult question. Well, I think I was in a leadership course, and I had to do a sort of a final reflection on my personal leadership. And when I was thinking back on the really decisive moments, for instance, in the development of the research master, every time that I showed sort of my leadership was every time that I said, I cannot do this, can you please help me? So recognizing the leadership of others and having faith was very important in that. Sometimes we literally asked people like, so maybe you know, this is not your daily, this is not what you're going to do on a daily basis, but you're just going to do this for this program. We really believe in it, but what do you think of it? Are you willing to free up your time or to spend your energy? And do you think you can contribute to that? And do you think you can, you know, co-own it with us? So I think it was really in that where the acknowledgement of co-ownership and co-creation that made the magic, I think.
Yeah, so being able to grant other people their talents and praise their energies really helps in that sense, right? And it is not about coordinating the tasks and the pockets that need to be done. And that is, and did that also help to get your team prepared for the final stage, like starting the program?
Yes, because I think everybody so we are a very horizontally organized program. So we have like, of course, we need to have titles because that's how the world works. But in reality, everybody has authority over their course and has authority over their experience, and we consult each other. So we make decisions by consultation. So I think it definitely helps because nobody in the program who's now working on it is getting sort of paid for the hours that they should get because they spend much more energy and time on it than what's formal. But they're only willing to do it because they own it, because they own, you know, the struggles and the success and their creation.
So your smart thing is that co-creation is not only co-creation, but is putting people on an equal footing, and that the learning experience is actually pervasive in all that you do in that program then.
Yeah, and I think it's the learning experience of all of us. Binneke flipped the conversation around by asking me about leadership, and it made me reflect of leadership in the first place. And I came to this realization that when we started this project of Genomics in Society, actually my leader back then gave me the stage. He said, okay, you have a plan, go ahead, do it. And instead of acting like a leader, he would just sit down with the rest of the team and listen to me and give me authority in that way. And maybe that has influenced this leadership style a lot. But how is it like for you to be, you know, in this situation?
So that sounds very familiar because I feel like I was also granted the stage. I had ideas about how I wanted to shape my courses and I got full license to do that. That only worked, I think, because all of the support that I needed doing that was in place. It was there. So that put me in a wonderful position where I had all of these ideas, but also all of these tools at my disposal where I could make it work and I could take risks and I could exchange ideas with lots of like-minded people who are also very motivated. So these were really wonderful conditions to actually do these things in for the first time because there was so much room for experimentation and risk-taking.
We arrive at the end of our journey here, and we went through a lot of steps to get here, steeps and lows, but I think it's important to stress a few more things.
Yeah, so I would say there's a really important point in the way we spoke about all of these steps as if we distinguish them from each other. And of course that's really important, but you have to realize that you do some of these things at the same time. So of course, you know, there is one point where you pitch your idea to the board of the university, but hopefully you've already thought a little bit about your design of your curriculum by then. So you're doing lots of things at the same time. You're not necessarily doing them sequentially. And I think that's very important to keep in mind for the overall process of working towards a master's program. And what about you?
Yeah, I was also thinking, so we brought to the table what our inspiration was, right? So we're working in this field of genomics in society already, which made us feel like we need an educational program in this field. So it's really unique to us. anyone else can bring their own uniqueness to their program within their own context. So then their basic ingredients would be a little bit different. I hope that anyone who's watching this video will reflect, like, what do I bring to the table and how would that translate to the recipe in my particular context?
And even though there are lots of differences, obviously, between run-ups to master programs, I think something that they'll all share is that you'll have incredible peaks and achievements and celebrations, but you're also going to reach very low points where you have very low motivation, low energy, or there's some obstacles along the way. But I think it's important to realize that that's also when you learn your most valuable lessons, and that these are lessons that you take with you for years to come, because a master's program is not something you do for just 1 year. It's something that you keep on expanding, that you keep on improving.
I hope that what we're spreading here is our passion for creating a new educational program, and also, this dot on the horizon, because we actually started our research master. We're almost at the end of our first year. We've made it happen, like going from a paper reality to reality, and it was magic.
Was it worth it?
It was totally worth it. We had such an amazing ride together.
We want to thank everyone involved in this process very much. Each and every relationship that we've built in the process of setting up this master's has been essential. So thank you very much for being a part of this. And I think there's one person in particular that we'd really like to thank.
Yes, this is our late department head, Robert Hoefstra. I'm really sure that without him, there would not be this research master. He gave us the stage and he had faith, and he cheerled us from the beginning. And so also this video is a tribute to him. We want to pay it forward and to give you guys a head start with setting up your program, and to honor the people that made this possible.
So if you've watched this video and you have ideas or comments or questions, we're very eager to hear about that. So here's our contact details, and don't hesitate to contact us with any questions or comments that you have.
Yeah, we look forward to interacting with you. Good luck, have fun setting up your educational program.
Good luck.